Hello Year 9. So we are looking at packaging and the environment today on this kind of environmental factors affected by food. So evaluating the ways in which food establishments can have a more positive effect on the environment. So we're looking at this last section today. So how hospitality and catering establishments can impact the environment and how it can affect the success of their businesses. So, food packaging follows the supply chain. You might find it quite difficult to see the arrows on here, but I go into a bit more detail on the future slides. So this is how the chain kind of runs. And food packaging is present at every stage of the food chain. And it's not a food chain in science, like where one thing eats another thing. It's kind of the supply chain. So you start off with the producers, that might be the farmer, and then it kind of gets shipped out and it goes all the way along the chain until it gets basically to your plate. So the first stage, you've got the raw material from the producer going to a supplier. Some of the packaging that might be used, you are likely, so if you took tomatoes for example, once they're kind of all washed and cleaned and sorted, they would be packed into corrugated cardboard boxes, something like this. So similar to your bog standard box, or sometimes if you go to the supermarket, maybe not at the moment, but if you go to the supermarket, they quite often have like stacks of boxes stacked up. That's the kind of box you'd be looking at. They would be distributed on just wooden pallets. The reason they need to go on pallets is so they can be lifted up and moved around nice and easy by a forklift. And then sometimes there might be some kind of plastic packaging around the outside, just for kind of extra rigidity, really. Once they're at the supplier, they're then going to be, have some more quality checks, more sorting, but they'll likely then be repackaged in a similar way to then go to a factory for whatever secondary processing is going to happen. Just have a quick think. Pause the video now once I've asked you these questions. Just think about what happens to the old packaging where we've gone from the producer to the supplier. What happens once you get to the supplier and then it needs to go out to a factory? What could be done with it? So what do you think is done with it and what do you think could be done with it? So pause the video now to just jot those down. Okay, so once it's at the factory, there's going to be some more processing kind of taking place. So if we take tomatoes as the primary ingredient, that's then processed and turned into loads and loads of different secondary ingredients. And they can be packaged in a number of different ways. So you can see here, you've got tins for tin of chopped tomatoes, you've got a carton for passata, and then you also have a glass jar for passata. Those individual items are then often packaged into cardboard trays. So if you're in a supermarket, they're often then placed out actually on the shelves, still in those cardboard trays, just it makes it much easier to organise everything. And they'll then often have some kind of plastic wrapped around them to properly hold them together. Again, they will then be stacked within a cardboard box and popped on a pallet for delivery. So you've got another layer of packaging and a new load of packaging whilst it gets distributed. There may be some factories or some suppliers who will reuse the cardboard when they're then resending it out. Most won't. Sometimes it might be because things have got damaged and they've lost their structural integrity, but also they won't necessarily have any branding, anything like that on there, and factories and suppliers want to make sure that it's their own branding that is being shown. So this is the one where it goes from distribution, so from a factory that has produced whatever to retail, and by retail it means things like supermarkets, restaurants, schools, prisons, etc. The distribution, the wholesaler, they buy the products from the suppliers in bulk and then they redistribute it to various retail outlets. They're not necessarily doing anything different with those supplies, they're just resending it out. So somewhere like a school might order food from, there's a company called Breaks that supplies food and bits and pieces to schools and prisons, etc. And they might then get a box with lots of different supplies within the same box. So it will have had to have been repackaged again. And this is where you're most likely, it's almost like a sticky kind of quite thick cling film. This is when things are more likely to have this wrapped around them as well, because it gives them a bit more rigidity. They're less likely to fall about because they won't fit neatly into the box, because all of the trays, all of the packaging will be a slightly different material, but again on another pallet and within a cardboard box. This one is the one we're kind of focusing on, is the packaging from retail, so that might be the restaurant, to you as the customer. So if you're eating at a restaurant, you'll have kind of plates and glasses and knives and forks, etc., and they're reusable, which will have a massive impact on reducing waste. But you do need to consider the environmental impact of them being made in the first place and them being cleaned, and whether that, in the grand scale of things, how that balances out with kind of single-use or recyclable piece of equipment. If you're having your food to takeaway, you'll be provided with a takeaway container from the takeaway, normally either plastic or foil. They're the kind of standard ones that we're used to seeing. But there are quite a lot of new containers which are biodegradable on the market, or much more eco-friendly. But there are lots that are single-use, and so they're hard to recycle. Quite often you might start reusing them at home, but because they're quite flimsy, it's not like buying a Tupperware pot from a supermarket or from a shop. They might not last a particularly long time. Just have a think about any other way you might be able to collect your food from a takeaway, so you can avoid having to use those single-use containers. So pause the video now and just scribble an answer down for me. Okay, so your main task is you're going to use the information from the resources provided. So that is this PowerPoint that is on Teams, and then I've also popped a couple of other bits on there as well. And you need to find an eco-friendly, so something that's not as bad for the environment, packaging solution for the following items. So a cold drink, stir-fried noodles, and a sandwich. It doesn't need to be one solution for all three, it's 3 different solutions. And they need to explain why each of your solutions is the best option for that item. So you'll have to have a little bit of a research to find out what some of those items are to begin with, and then really think about what is going to be effective, because there's no point in having something that isn't going to be functional, isn't going to work. So quite a good example are paper straws you get. If you say the cold drink was a milkshake, I'm sure loads of you have used paper straw from McDonald's. If you're drinking like a Coke or something, the paper straw works fine. If you're drinking a milkshake, it doesn't work, it's not functional. So you need to make sure you're thinking of something that actually works for their purpose. So think about how it's used, think about where you're taking them, how you're going to eat out of it, do you need to eat out of it, and how you can dispose of them. Once you've done that, please make sure that you are then uploading your work onto Teams, and we have got an end of term assessment in the last 15 minutes of this lesson. It's a little bit shorter than your midterm assessment, but in the same format, on the stuff we've done on the environmental impact of food. So just join the live call 15 minutes before the end of your lesson. Thank you, Year 9.